The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art didn't just glitter with diamonds. It crackled with the electric hum of a billion-dollar legacy. This was the night of the annual Blackwood Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of New York's high society. At its center was Leander Blackwood, a tech titan with a predator's smile and the keys to the digital kingdom. He was a man who had everything: the empire, the adoration, the perfect wife. But as champagne flowed and cameras flashed, Leander sealed his fate with a single, public embrace. It was a hug meant for his mistress, the bewitching artist Sienna Vance. A moment of stolen intimacy, a whispered secret. He was so lost in her eyes, he never saw the real story, the one that would shatter his world unfolding just a few feet away. Because standing right behind him, her hand resting on their unborn child, was his pregnant wife, Mireille, and her silence was about to become the loudest sound in the city. The weight of the Blackwood name was heavier than the diamonds dripping from Mireille's ears. It was a currency of power, a shield of prestige, and tonight, a gilded cage. From her vantage point on the mezzanine overlooking the gala, Mireille Blackwood watched her husband, Leander, work the room. He moved like a panther, sleek and confident in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. Every smile was a transaction, every handshake a confirmation of his dominance. He was the sun, and everyone in this glittering solar system of finance, art, and politics orbited him. And she, his wife, was meant to be his Venus, beautiful, admired, and perfectly aligned. But for the past 6 months, her orbit had felt off. The gravitational pull of their marriage had weakened, leaving her drifting in a cold, unfamiliar space. It had started with small things. Late nights at the headquarters of his global tech empire, Ethelred Corp, which he explained away as preparations for the launch of their new Prometheus AI platform. Phone calls taken in the other room, his voice a low, guarded murmur. A new scent on his shirts, not the sharp, citrusy cologne she bought him, but something softer, floral, and distinctly feminine. Mireille wasn't naive. She was a Beaumont, a name that carried as much weight in the hushed halls of old money as Blackwood did in the frenetic world of new tech. Her family hadn't built their fortune on foolishness. Her mother, the formidable Eleanor Beaumont, had warned her. Men like Leander, she had said over tea in her perfectly manicured garden, don't build empires by being content. They are conquerors. Be sure it's always you he wants to conquer, darling, and not the world beyond your door. She had dismissed it as the cynicism of a bygone era. Her love with Leander had felt real, a whirlwind romance that had captivated the public imagination. The brilliant tech visionary and the elegant heiress. He had valued her mind, her insights into market trends, her ability to charm a room of skeptical investors. She wasn't just a trophy, she was his partner. Or so she had believed. Now 7 months pregnant with their first child, a boy, the heir to the Blackwood dynasty, a creeping dread had become her constant companion. The pregnancy was high risk, a detail they had kept fiercely private. Her doctors had prescribed rest and a stress-free environment. A bitter laugh almost escaped her lips. A stress-free environment in the Blackwood world was a fantasy. Her hand went instinctively to the swell of her belly, a protective gesture that had become second nature. This baby was her anchor, her purpose in the increasingly turbulent waters of her life. She had tried to talk to Leander, to bridge the growing chasm between them. Last week, she'd waited up for him, wearing a silk negligee that felt more like a costume than an invitation. When he finally came home, smelling of that strange perfume and expensive whiskey, he had simply kissed her forehead, murmured something about a brutal day, and retreated to the guest suite, claiming he didn't want to disturb her rest. The rejection was as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. Her eyes scanned the crowd again, searching for him. And then she saw her, Sienna Vance. She was impossible to miss, a slash of crimson silk in a sea of tasteful black and gold. Her hair was a cascade of fiery auburn curls, and she held a champagne flute with an artist's languid grace. Mireille knew who she was, of course. Leander had been consumed by her for the past 3 months. Sienna was a digital artist, a rising star whose work explored the intersection of human emotion and artificial intelligence. Leander's company was sponsoring her upcoming solo exhibition, synthetic souls. He'd called it a strategic acquisition of cultural capital. He spoke of her talent, her vision, her revolutionary use of their Prometheus AI to generate haunting, beautiful images. He never spoke of her beauty, but he didn't have to. Now watching him approach Sienna near the foot of the grand staircase, Mireille felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The professional distance he maintained with everyone else dissolved. He leaned in close, his hand finding the small of her back. The gesture was too familiar, too intimate. Sienna looked up at him, a slow, knowing smile spreading across her lips. They were in their own world, oblivious to the hundreds of pairs of eyes in the room. Mireille's best friend Chloe materialized at her side, her expression laced with concern. "Are you seeing this?" Chloe whispered, her voice tight with anger. "He's not even trying to hide it." "It's business, Chloe," Mireille said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. Ethelred is her biggest sponsor. Izzy, the way he's looking at her, has nothing to do with business and everything to do with the fact her dress looks like it was painted on, Chloe retorted, her loyalty a fierce protective shield. "You need to go down there. Mark your territory." Mark her territory. It sounded so primitive, so undignified, but Chloe was right. She couldn't stand here like a ghost in her own life. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, she straightened her shoulders, the midnight blue velvet of her maternity gown falling in regal folds. She was Mireille Beaumont Blackwood. She was the matriarch of this family, the mother of the heir. She would not be ignored. She descended the marble staircase slowly, each step a deliberate act of will. Heads turned, smiles were directed her way. The wife had arrived. She navigated the glittering crowd, her own smile a perfect, polished mask. She could feel the subtle shifts in the room's energy as people noticed both her and the scene unfolding near the staircase. The air grew thick with unspoken gossip. Leander was laughing now, a full-throated, genuine laugh that Mireille hadn't heard directed at her in months. Sienna reached out and brushed a piece of lint from his lapel, her fingers lingering for a fraction of a second too long. It was a gesture of such casual intimacy, it made Mireille's breath catch in her throat. She was 10 feet away, then 5. Leander's back was to her. He was saying something to Sienna, his voice low and intense. Sienna's eyes, a startling shade of green, flickered over Leander's shoulder and met Mireille's. For a heartbeat, time froze. There was no recognition in Sienna's gaze, no flicker of shame or surprise. There was only a cool, calm assessment, a flicker of something that looked almost like victory. And then, the moment that would be seared into her memory forever. Lost in their private world, Leander wrapped his arms around Sienna Vance. It wasn't a friendly, professional hug. It was a possessive, all-encompassing embrace. He buried his face in her fiery hair, his entire body language screaming devotion, relief, and a desperate kind of intimacy. Sienna's arms snaked around his neck, her crimson-gloved hands clasping behind his head, pulling him closer. The world went silent for Mireille. The orchestra, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull, roaring vacuum. All she could see was her husband, the father of her child, holding another woman as if she were the center of his universe. And she, his pregnant wife, was standing right behind him. A camera flash exploded from the periphery, then another. They hadn't seen her yet. Their focus was on the billionaire and his beautiful companion. But Mireille knew. It was only a matter of seconds before someone turned, before the narrative shifted from a powerful man's charm to a powerful man's betrayal. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't march forward and slap them both. In that moment of absolute soul-crushing devastation, her Beaumont breeding took over. She turned with a grace and composure that defied the hurricane raging inside her and walked away. Her retreat was as silent and swift as her approach. She didn't see the exact moment a society photographer from the New York Chronicle lowered his camera from the couple and caught her retreating form, her hand on her belly, her face a mask of exquisite, heartbreaking tragedy. The photo that would grace the front page the next morning was already taken. The match was lit. The world of Leander Blackwood was about to burn. Chloe found her in the ladies' powder room, a lavish space of marble and gold that suddenly felt like a tomb. Mireille was staring at her own reflection in the ornate mirror, but she didn't see herself. She saw only the ghost of the woman she had been just 10 minutes ago, a woman who still clung to a sliver of hope. That ghost was gone now, replaced by a stranger with hollow eyes and a pallor that even the soft lighting couldn't hide. Izzy? My God, I'm so sorry. Chloe rushed to her side, her hands fluttering, unsure whether to touch her. I saw. Everyone saw. Mireille finally blinked, her reflection wavering as her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Get me out of here, Chloe. Now before he sees me. Before anyone else does. What about the car? The driver? We'll take yours. I'll text my driver to wait. I don't want anyone on Leander's staff to know I left. The words were cold, precise. The shock was already crystallizing into something harder, something sharper. It was survival. Chloe, bless her, didn't ask any more questions. She simply wrapped a protective arm around Mireille, guiding her through a service corridor and out into the cool night air, away from the prying eyes and flashing cameras of the main entrance. The drive back to the Blackwood penthouse, a sprawling glass palace overlooking Central Park, was a blur. Chloe's concerned chatter faded into the background as the scene at the gala played on a torturous loop in Mireille's mind. Leander's laugh, Sienna's triumphant gaze, the embrace. The moment they stepped into the cavernous marble foyer of the penthouse, the silence was deafening. This home, once a symbol of their shared success, now felt like a mausoleum for a dead marriage. The portraits of them, sailing in the Hamptons, skiing in Aspen, smiling at their wedding, were lies. Every single one of them. Do you want me to stay? Chloe asked, her voice soft. Mireille shook her head. I need to be alone. But thank you, Chloe, for everything. She managed a weak smile. Call me in the morning, please. After her friend left, Mireille walked through the silent apartment. She passed the nursery, its door slightly ajar. The team of world-class designers had just finished it last week, a serene space of soft neutrals with a hand-painted mural of celestial animals on the ceiling. A wave of nausea, so profound it buckled her knees, washed over her. She gripped the doorframe, her knuckles turning white. This room was supposed to be a sanctuary of love and hope. Now it was just a part of the set, a prop in the grand play of the perfect Blackwood family. She retreated to her master suite, a wing of the penthouse that was hers alone. She stripped off the velvet gown and the heavy diamonds, leaving them in a heap on the floor. In the shower, she scrubbed at her skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the filth of the evening, the humiliation, the scent of her husband's betrayal that seemed to linger in the air. It was just after 2 a.m. when she heard Leander come in. She lay perfectly still in their enormous bed, her back to the door, feigning sleep. He was quiet, but not quiet enough. She heard the clink of his cufflinks on the dresser, the sigh as he loosened his tie. He was humming, a low, contented sound that made her blood run cold. He slid into bed, the mattress dipping with his weight. The scent of that other woman's perfume was on him, faint but unmistakable. He thought she was asleep. He thought he had gotten away with it. He whispered, his voice thick with false concern. You left early. Julian said you weren't feeling well. Is everything okay? The baby. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She didn't move, didn't breathe. He sighed again, a sound of frustration this time. He rolled over, away from her, and within minutes the sound of his deep, even breathing filled the room. He was asleep, happy, content, and asleep next to the wife he had just publicly shattered. Mireille lay awake in the dark, a silent scream trapped in her chest. Sleep was an impossible luxury. She slid out of bed and went to her private study, the city lights twinkling below like a million indifferent stars. She opened her laptop. The first tremors of the earthquake were already being felt online. The society blogs and gossip sites were buzzing. Leander Blackwood's fiery new friend, one headline read. Ethelred CEO and artist Sienna Vance inseparable at Met Gala, said another. The early articles were cautious, filled with innuendo rather than outright accusations. But the pictures told the story. Dozens of them. Leander and Sienna, their heads together, laughing, touching, the hug, and then she found it. The New York Chronicle's online edition had just updated its front page. The lead photo was massive, stark, and utterly devastating. It was the one that captured everything. Leander and Sienna were in the foreground, locked in their embrace, a portrait of illicit passion, and in the background, perfectly framed by Leander's arm, was Mireille. She was out of focus, almost ethereal, but her identity was unmistakable. Her hand on her pregnant stomach, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated pain. The headline was brutal in its simplicity, the triangle. Beneath it, the subheadline twisted the knife. While a radiant Sienna Vance accepts the embrace of billionaire Leander Blackwood, his pregnant wife Mireille makes a lonely retreat, a picture that says 1,000 words. A sharp stabbing pain shot through her abdomen. She gasped, clutching her belly as the room began to spin. It wasn't just emotional pain anymore. It was physical. A wave of dizziness and a terrifying cramping sensation seized her. Panicked, she crawled to the phone on her desk, her fingers fumbling as she dialed the number for her obstetrician's emergency line. The sound of her own ragged breathing was the only thing she could hear as she whispered her symptoms to the on-call doctor. The advice was immediate and firm. Get to the hospital. Now she hung up, her mind racing. She couldn't wake Leander. She couldn't let him play the part of the concerned husband. Not now. This was a vulnerability she could not afford to show him. This was a battle she had to fight alone. With trembling hands, she called the one person she knew she could trust implicitly, the one person whose loyalty was to the Beaumont name, not the Blackwood one. "It's Mireille," she whispered when the call was answered. "I need you to pick me up. The service entrance. 10 minutes, and tell no one." Julian Croft, Leander's best friend and the chief operating officer of Ethelred Corp., stood in the sterile white hallway of the Lenox Hill Hospital maternity ward, his expensive suit looking out of place. He'd arrived 20 minutes after Mireille, summoned by a panicked Leander, who had woken up to an empty bed and the viral photo that was now setting the internet on fire. "How is she?" Leander demanded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He looked pale, shaken. The confident titan from the gala was gone, replaced by a man staring into an abyss of his own making. The doctors said the stress caused a placental abruption. "It's minor, but they're keeping her for observation. They're trying to stop premature labor," Julian said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual warmth. Leander sagged against the wall, the color draining from his face. "Premature labor? My God, is the baby?" "They think the baby will be okay. They've stabilized her for now. She's resting." Julian finally looked at Leander, his eyes cold with a disappointment that cut deeper than any anger. "She won't see you, Leander." "What do you mean she won't see me? She's my wife." No, Julian's voice was quiet but firm. "She asked for her mother. Eleanor Beaumont is in there with her now. Her specific words were, 'I don't want that man anywhere near me or my son.'" The words hit Leander like a physical blow. That man, not Leander, not her husband. "She doesn't understand," Leander stammered, the desperation clear in his voice. "It was a misunderstanding. The camera angle. Sienna is just, she's an artist, a colleague." Julian stared at him, his expression one of pure disbelief. "A colleague? Leander, I've stood by you through everything. I've covered for your late nights. I've lied to Izzy for you, something that has made me sick to my stomach. I told you to end it. I told you that you were playing with fire. And now the whole damn world is burned, and you're still trying to sell me on colleagues?" The confrontation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Before Leander could respond, the door to Mireille's room opened. Eleanor Beaumont stepped out, her posture ramrod straight, her face carved from granite. She was the picture of aristocratic fury. She walked directly up to Leander, her eyes like chips of ice. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her words were quiet, precise, and absolutely lethal. "You have done what no business rival or market crash ever could, Leander," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You have broken my daughter, and in doing so you have declared war on my family. You will not see her. You will not see my grandson. From this moment on, you will communicate only through our lawyers. Now get out of my sight." She turned her back on him and walked away, a queen dismissing a court jester. Leander stood there, stunned into silence, as the full weight of the catastrophe crashed down upon him. He hadn't just made a mistake, he had shattered a dynasty. And the woman lying in that hospital bed wasn't just a victim, she was a Beaumont, and the Beaumonts never ever lost. For 3 days, Mireille remained in the hushed, sterile sanctuary of her private hospital suite. The immediate medical crisis had passed. The doctors had successfully halted the contractions, but she was ordered on strict bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. The quiet confinement, however, was not a prison. It was a war room, with her mother Eleanor as her field marshal and Chloe as her loyal communications officer. The suite was transformed into the headquarters of a silent coup. The flowers and fawning notes from Leander were returned, unopened. His frantic texts and voicemails went unanswered. He was locked out, not just from her room, but from her life. The world outside was in a frenzy. The triangle photo was everywhere, a viral symbol of billionaire malfeasance. Sienna Vance was no longer just an artist. She was now the most famous other woman in the world, hounded by paparazzi. In a move of calculated audacity, she gave an exclusive interview to a high-profile magazine. She played the part of the reluctant muse, an artist swept up by a powerful man's passion, speaking of a deep intellectual connection with Leander that transcended simple labels. She never admitted to a physical affair, but her carefully chosen words painted a picture of a love that was tragically misunderstood. It was a masterpiece of public relations, designed to make her a sympathetic figure, not a homewrecker. It made Mireille's blood boil. While she was fighting to keep her son safe inside her, this woman was curating her own narrative, spinning a web of artistic lies. "She's good," Eleanor commented dryly, reading the interview on her tablet. "She's playing the long game. She wants to be the next Mrs. Blackwood, not a fleeting mistress." "There won't be a next Mrs. Blackwood," Mireille said, her voice devoid of emotion. "There will only be the wreckage." Leander, meanwhile, was in full damage control mode. He released a public statement through Ethelred Corp, decrying the malicious invasion of privacy and referring to Sienna Vance as a valued business partner. He spoke of his deep love and concern for his wife during this challenging time for their family. The corporate speak was so transparently false it was insulting. He tried to leverage Julian, calling him at all hours, begging him to act as an intermediary. But Julian's loyalty had finally fractured. "I spoke to her lawyer, Leander," Julian said over the phone, his tone weary. "She's serious. They're drawing up the papers." "She's just emotional. She's pregnant. She's hormonal," Leander exclaimed, his voice rising in panic. "She doesn't mean it. Once she's home, I can talk to her. I can fix this." "You still don't get it, do you?" Julian's voice was laced with a pity that felt worse than anger. "You didn't just cheat on your wife. You cheated on Mireille Beaumont. You humiliated her in front of the entire world. There's no fixing that. You broke trust with the one person who was the bedrock of your entire life. Your partner, remember?" That was the word that haunted Leander. Partner. Mireille hadn't just been his wife. She was his consigliere, his secret weapon. Her old money instincts had perfectly balanced his new money aggression. She had talked him out of disastrous deals and pushed him toward ventures that had become legendary successes. The launch of the Prometheus AI, the very project that had brought Sienna into their orbit, had been Mireille's brainchild. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. He was adrift, both personally and professionally. Whispers started circulating on Wall Street. Was the visionary Leander Blackwood losing his touch? Was his personal chaos affecting his judgment? Ethelred Corp's stock, once unassailable, dipped by a few points. It was a small drop, but it was a signal. The sharks were beginning to circle. Back in the hospital, Mireille was doing more than just healing. She was strategizing. "Humiliation is a powerful motivator, Mother," she said, looking out the window at the city. "But it's not a legal strategy. I need leverage, something more than a photograph." "What are you thinking, darling?" Eleanor asked, her eyes sharp. "Sienna Vance. Leander may be a fool, but he's a brilliant fool. He wouldn't risk his empire for just anyone. There's something more to her. She's too polished, too perfect. People like that aren't real. And so the quiet investigation began. Eleanor engaged a team of private investigators, the best in the business, the kind of discreet professionals the Beaumont family had kept on retainer for generations. They weren't to dig for dirt on a cheating spouse. They were instructed to conduct a full forensic background check on Sienna Vance, from her birth certificate to her university transcripts to her tax returns. For a week, there was nothing. Sienna Vance's life appeared to be an open book. Born in Oregon, art scholarship to RISD, a steady climb through the New York art scene. Her story was clean, almost too clean. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A junior investigator, a tech-savvy millennial, decided to go beyond the usual databases. He started digging into the dark web, cross-referencing metadata from Sienna's earliest digital artworks, looking for old usernames, forgotten forum posts, anything. And he found it. A ghost. A digital echo from over a decade ago. Before she was Sienna Vance, the celebrated artist, she had a different online handle, Astra, and Astra had been a prominent member of a high-level hacking collective, a collective that had been investigated but never prosecuted for a sophisticated corporate espionage attack on a rival tech firm, a firm that had been Ethelred Corporation's biggest competitor at the time. But that wasn't the twist. The twist was who she was connected to within that world. The investigator found encrypted chat logs from years ago, conversations between Astra and another handle, Karen. The logs were old, but the content was explosive. They discussed vulnerabilities in corporate security, the psychology of CEOs, and a shared philosophy of disruption. The investigator ran a deep analysis on the linguistic patterns, the syntax, the specific technical jargon used by Karen. He then cross-referenced it with every piece of digital communication he could find from Ethelred's senior leadership. The result hit like a lightning bolt. Chloe brought the encrypted file to the hospital on a secure laptop. The three women gathered around the screen as Mireille read the investigator's report. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. Caron, the report concluded, with 98.7% certainty, based on linguistic forensics and traced IP fragments from an old country club server, was the digital pseudonym used by Alistair Blackwood, Leander's father. Alistair Blackwood was a titan of the old guard, a ruthless industrialist whom Leander had overthrown in a brutal but successful boardroom coup 5 years ago to gain control of the family company. Their relationship was famously toxic, a cold war of resentment and ambition. Alistair saw his son's modern, more humane approach to business as a weakness. He despised Leander's marriage to Mireille, viewing the Beaumont influence as a diluting agent to the Blackwood killer instinct. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Sienna Vance wasn't just a random artist Leander had fallen for. She was a weapon, a highly sophisticated, professionally deployed asset. Who had more to gain from the implosion of Leander's personal and professional life than his own estranged father? A messy public divorce could trigger clauses in the company's bylaws, destabilize Leander's control, and crater the stock price, creating the perfect opportunity for a hostile takeover. Alistair wouldn't just be taking back his company, he would be destroying his son's entire world in the process. Mireille leaned back against her pillows, the laptop resting on her swollen belly. A slow, cold smile touched her lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness, but of grim, terrible vindication. "He didn't just cheat on me," she whispered, looking at her mother. "He was set up. We were all set up." Eleanor's expression was grim. "This is no longer a divorce, Mireille. This is a war for the entire Blackwood Empire. And Alistair just handed you the ammunition to win it." Mireille picked up her phone. It was time to break her silence. But she didn't call her lawyer. She didn't call the press. She sent a single text message, not to Leander, but to Sienna Vance. "The penthouse. Tomorrow noon. Come alone. We have so much to talk about." Then she sent a second text to Leander. "I'm coming home tomorrow. I want to talk. But not just to you. Sienna is to be there as well. Noon. Don't be late." The stage was set, not for a tearful reconciliation or a screaming match, but for a reckoning. And Mireille would be the one directing the final act. The Blackwood penthouse had never felt so cold. The floor-to-ceiling windows, usually a source of breathtaking light and energy, now seemed to look out on a gray, unforgiving city. The minimalist furniture, once the height of modern elegance, felt stark and soulless. It was a perfect stage for the drama that was about to unfold. Leander paced the vast living room like a caged animal. He had been ecstatic when he received Mireille's text, seeing it as the breakthrough he'd been praying for. But his elation had quickly curdled into a knot of anxiety. The demand to have Sienna present was bizarre, a power play he couldn't decipher. What was Mireille planning? Sienna arrived first, precisely at 11:55 a.m. She was the picture of composed artistry, dressed in tailored black trousers and a cream silk blouse. Her fiery hair was pulled back in a severe knot, her expression unreadable. She carried with her an aura of detached confidence that grated on Leander's frayed nerves. "Leander," she said, her voice smooth as velvet, "you look terrible." "What is this, Sienna? What does she want?" he demanded, forgoing any pleasantries. "I imagine she wants what any woman in her position would want," Sienna replied, glancing around the room as if appraising its value. "An explanation. Perhaps an apology. A pound of flesh." Before Leander could respond, the elevator doors chimed, opening directly into the penthouse foyer. Mireille entered. She wasn't in a wheelchair, as Leander had feared, but she moved with a slow, deliberate grace, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. She wasn't wearing the soft, forgiving clothes of a woman on bed rest. She was dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue dress that was both elegant and severe. Her hair was styled, her makeup flawless. The fragile, broken woman from the gala was gone. In her place stood a queen, cold, controlled, and radiating an authority that silenced the room. Chloe and her mother, Eleanor, followed a few paces behind, their presence a clear signal that this was not a private, intimate conversation. This was a formal proceeding. Mireille's eyes swept over Leander, her gaze lingering for a moment with a look of profound disappointment that was more cutting than any anger. Then her focus shifted to Sienna. She held the artist's gaze, and for the first time, Sienna's composure seemed to falter. "Thank you both for coming," Mireille said, her voice calm and steady. She gestured to the two large white sofas that faced each other across a marble coffee table. "Please, sit." It was a command, not a request. Leander and Sienna sat on one sofa, Mireille and Eleanor on the other. Chloe remained standing near the door, a silent sentinel. Mireille placed a thin, sealed manila envelope on the coffee table. "I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about betrayal," she began, her voice resonating in the quiet room. "It's a fascinating thing. It has layers. On the surface, there's the simple, grubby act of infidelity. The lies, the secret meetings, the scent of another woman's perfume." She looked directly at Leander. "That part, Leander, is yours alone. You broke our vows. You humiliated me. You put the life of our son at risk. That is a betrayal I will carry with me forever. And for that, there is no forgiveness." Leander opened his mouth to speak, to offer the apologies he had rehearsed 1,000 times. But Mireille raised a hand, silencing him. "But that's only the first layer," she continued, her gaze shifting to Sienna. "Then there's a more complex, more interesting layer. The betrayal that is planned. The one that wears a disguise." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing on the artist. "You, Sienna, you are a truly gifted artist. Not just with paint and pixels, but with people. You crafted a beautiful narrative for yourself. The passionate muse, caught in a tragic romance. But your greatest creation, your true masterpiece, was the role you played for my husband." Sienna forced a small, condescending laugh. "Mireille, if you're trying to say I seduced your husband, I think you're giving me too much credit, and him not nearly enough." "Oh, I'm not talking about seduction," Mireille said, her voice turning to ice. "I'm talking about espionage." She pushed the manila envelope across the table. "I believe you used to go by the name Astra online. Does that ring a bell?" The last vestiges of color drained from Sienna's face. The mask of cool indifference shattered, replaced by a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. Leander stared at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Astra," Mireille pressed on, her voice relentless. "A key member of a hacking collective, known for corporate disruption, a digital ghost with a very specific skill set. A skill set that would be incredibly valuable to someone who wanted to destabilize a company. Someone like, say, a bitter old man who was forced out of his own empire. She let the words hang in the air. Leander looked as though he had been physically struck. What are you talking about? My father? Mireille ignored him, her focus locked on Sienna. I wonder what Alistair Blackwood promised you. A gallery? A permanent installation at Ethelred? Or was it just the thrill of the game? The ultimate disruption. Karen and Astra, reunited for one last performance. Sienna stared at the envelope on the table as if it were a venomous snake. Her composure was gone, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. My father, Leander whispered, the words catching in his throat. He wouldn't. But even as he said it, a lifetime of bitter rivalry, of psychological warfare, of cold, calculating ambition, told him that his father absolutely would. He saw it all now. Alistair's strange, almost gleeful calls in recent weeks, asking pointed questions about the Prometheus launch, about his marriage. He had thought it was just his father's usual needling. Now he saw it for what it was, a general surveying his battlefield. Tell me, Sienna, Eleanor Beaumont spoke for the first time, her voice like cracking ice. Was sleeping with the son part of your deal with the father? Or was that just a perk of the job? Sienna finally broke. She looked from Eleanor's contemptuous face to Mireille's cold fury, to Leander's utter devastation. The game was over. He found me, Sienna said, her voice barely a whisper. Alistair. He'd been tracking me for years. He knew everything about my past. He said he had an opportunity for me, a project. He wanted me to get close to Leander, to become a distraction. He said Leander's marriage had made him soft, unfocused. He wanted to prove to the board that Leander's personal life was a liability. And the affair? Mireille asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Sienna finally looked at Leander, a flicker of something, pity, regret, in her eyes. That wasn't part of the initial plan. The plan was just to create a public perception of impropriety, to sow doubt. But Leander, he was so eager for a connection, for someone to see him as more than just a CEO. It was easy. The word easy hung in the air, a final, brutal indictment of Leander's failure. He had been so lost, so desperate for an escape, that he had walked willingly into a trap set by his own father. The betrayal was so profound, so monstrous, it dwarfed his own infidelity. He had been a pawn in a war he didn't even know was being fought. Mireille stood up. The reckoning was complete. This marriage is over, Leander, she said, her voice final. Our lawyers will be in touch. They will be discussing not just the terms of a divorce, but the terms of my separation from Ethelred Corporation. Leander shot to his feet. Izzy, wait. You can't leave the company. We built it together. You will be fighting your father for the soul of your company, Mireille corrected him, her voice steely. I will be protecting my assets, and the assets of my son. The pre-nuptial agreement gives me a significant stake. Shares that I was gifted, shares tied to projects that I initiated. I will be forming my own holding company, and I will be voting my shares to protect my investment. You want to fight a war with your father? Fine, but I will not be collateral damage. I will be a kingmaker. She turned to leave, her mother and Chloe falling into step beside her. She paused at the foyer, turning back one last time to look at the wreckage. Leander stood in the middle of the room, a broken man, staring at nothing. Sienna sat huddled on the sofa, a conspirator whose conspiracy had just blown up in her face. One more thing, Leander, Mireille said, her voice clear and carrying across the room. That envelope on the table contains all the proof. The chat logs between Astra and Karen, Alistair's encrypted communications with Sienna. Everything. What you do with it is up to you. You can use it to destroy your father and save your company, or you can let him win. Frankly, I don't care. My priority is the life I am carrying, a Beaumont heir, and he will be raised far from the poison of the Blackwood name. She turned and walked into the elevator without a backward glance. The doors slid shut, leaving Leander alone in the ruins of his life, with his mistress and the proof of a betrayal so deep it had redefined the very meaning of the word. The echo of the elevator doors sliding shut was a sound of absolute finality. It left Leander Blackwood standing in the cavernous living room of his penthouse, a king surveying a kingdom that had just turned to dust. The silence that descended was heavier and more suffocating than any noise. Across from him, Sienna Vance remained on the white sofa, a statue carved from shattered composure. The envelope Mireille had left on the marble table between them seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, the physical manifestation of all their ruin. For a long moment, Leander didn't move. Then a shudder racked his body, and a guttural sound of pure rage tore from his throat. He swept a hand across the coffee table, sending the envelope, a priceless crystal vase, and a stack of art books crashing to the floor. Sienna flinched but didn't speak. She slowly rose to her feet, her movements stiff and cautious, like an animal that knows it's cornered. "Get out," Leander rasped, his back to her, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Leander," she began, her own voice thin and reedy. "Did you ever feel anything?" he interrupted, turning to face her, his eyes blazing with a pain so raw it was terrifying. "Or was every touch, every word, every single moment just a line in your script?" Sienna met his gaze, and for the first time, the mask was completely gone. There was no artistry left, only the stark reality of a mercenary who had failed her mission. "It was a job," she said, her voice flat. "You were a mark. It got complicated. But in the end, it was always a job." Her admission, cold and unadorned, was somehow more brutal than the grand conspiracy itself. He hadn't even been worthy of a genuine betrayal. He had simply been an objective. He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. He didn't say another word, just pointed toward the elevator. Sienna gathered what little dignity she had left and walked away, the soft chime of the elevator announcing her permanent exit from his life. Left alone with the wreckage, Leander sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. He had been played, by his father, by his mistress, and in the end, outmaneuvered by his wife. The humiliation was a physical sickness, churning in his gut. The war for his company was now inevitable, but the victory already felt like ashes in his mouth. The 6 months that followed were a masterclass in scorched earth litigation and corporate warfare. Mireille's lawyers, acting with the swift, merciless precision of a special forces unit, filed for divorce. The documents were a bloodless catalog of his failings, not just as a husband, but as a fiduciary partner whose reckless personal conduct endangered the stability of shared assets. Simultaneously, Mireille established Beaumont Holdings. It wasn't just a quiet office for managing her fortune, it was a statement. She held her first board meeting in a sunlit room with warm oak and modern art, the antithesis of the cold chrome and glass of Ethelred Tower. With her significant, unassailable block of Ethelred shares as her firm's foundational asset, she became a major player overnight, a power broker who could influence the fate of the very company she had been exiled from. The message to Wall Street was clear. Mireille Beaumont was not hiding, she was hunting. Armed with the toxic evidence from the manila envelope, Leander staged his own coup. The confrontation with Alistair wasn't the screaming match of a betrayed son, but the cold, quiet execution of a rival. In the Ethelred boardroom, Leander laid out the encrypted chat logs, the financial trails, the entire sordid plot. Alistair, faced with the stony, unforgiving faces of the directors who had once been his allies, sputtered denials that crumbled into silence under the weight of the proof. He was given a choice, a quiet, complete divestment and permanent retirement, or federal prosecution for corporate espionage. The old lion had no fight left. He signed the papers, his hand trembling with impotent fury, and vanished from the world he had once ruled. Leander had won. He was the undisputed king of Ethelred Corp, his power absolute, but the victory was a desolate one. He rattled around the silent penthouse, a ghost in his own life. He had the nursery sealed, unable to bear the sight of the room meant for a son he might never know. He'd work until exhaustion claimed him, falling asleep in his clothes on the sofa, because the master bedroom felt like Mireille's sacred ground, a place he no longer had any right to enter. Then in the crisp air of early autumn, news broke in the circles that mattered. Mireille had given birth to a son, a healthy, beautiful boy, and in a final decisive act of severance, She had named him Nicholas Beaumont. There was no Blackwood heir. The dynasty Leander had been so proud to continue had ended with him. The true final act played out not in a courtroom, but in the quiet solitude of their separate lives. High above the city, in the corner office of Beaumont Holdings, Mireille stood by the window, gently rocking Nicholas in her arms. He was her world, his tiny, perfect presence a balm on the still tender scars of the past year. He represented a new kind of power, not one of shares and market caps, but one of unconditional love and limitless potential. Her phone buzzed with a news alert from a financial app. Ethelred Corporation, $AETH, announces record Q3 profits. Blackwood's focused leadership credited for unprecedented growth. She glanced at the headline, a flicker of a distant memory. The man she had built a dream with, crossing her mind. There was no anger, no bitterness, only the quiet, peaceful sense of a chapter definitively closed. She kissed her son's head and turned away from the window, her gaze fixed not on the skyline dominated by her past, but on the bright future she held in her arms. Miles away in the sterile grandeur of his own corner office, Leander saw the same alert. The soaring stock price brought him no joy. The glowing praise of his leadership felt like a lie. His gaze was fixed on his computer screen, on a candid photo published that morning on a society blog. It was Mireille walking through Central Park, pushing a stroller. She was laughing, her head thrown back in genuine, uninhibited delight as she looked down at her son. It was a joy he had not seen on her face in years, a joy he had personally extinguished, and that had now been rekindled far from his influence. He could see every detail, the way the autumn light caught in her hair, the effortless grace in her posture, the pure, unadulterated happiness that radiated from her. This was the woman he had won and then carelessly discarded. This was the life, the family, the warmth he had traded for a hollow crown. He closed his eyes, the silence of his empire pressing in on him. He had won the company, vanquished his enemies, and secured his legacy in the annals of business. But as he stared at the image of the life he could never reclaim, he knew with a chilling certainty that would haunt the rest of his days that he was the one who had truly lost everything. The price of his betrayal wasn't paid in dollars, but in a lifetime of knowing that true wealth was a laughing wife and a child's love, and he had willingly, foolishly thrown it all away. And so, the empire of Leander Blackwood was saved, but his world was left in ashes. This was a story of betrayal, but not just between a husband and wife. It was a story of a father betraying a son, of ambition poisoning love, and of the incredible strength of a woman who refused to be a victim. Mireille Beaumont didn't just walk away from the wreckage. She built a new kingdom from its ruins, on her own terms. It's a powerful reminder that in the world of the ultra-rich, love, loyalty, and family are often just pawns in the most dangerous game of all. What did you think of Mireille's ultimate power move? Was Leander a villain or just a fool trapped by his own father? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of drama, betrayal, and revenge, please hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good scandal, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more real-life dramas, just like this one. Click that notification bell so you never miss a single shocking story.